Welcome back to Risk Required, the podcast all about the financial tips and tricks that could help you escape the 9 to 5. We're joined today by Dan Marsh. Dan I met in 2014 when I was working at Octopus. He was a rising star back then, but now you could say that he has risen. He worked for Octopus Investments. He set up Octopus Wealth, which was a financial advice firm, then went on to work at Seckle, Octopus Money, and is now the Chief Strategy Officer for Octopus Group and spends his time buying up other companies that all mesh in to the world of Octopus and helping people and delivering amazing customer service. The information and opinions in this podcast are provided for informational and educational purposes only and do not constitute financial advice. The presenter, production and publisher are not responsible or liable for any analysis made by the audience based on the information in this recording. No parties warrant or guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information. Audiences should always do their own research or consult an independent financial advisor who will advise based on the individual's specific circumstances. Welcome. Do you want to just start by talking us through that career a bit? It's an incredible rise over 10 years. So just what made you make each jump of that journey and make those decisions to get to where you are today?
Thanks very much, Ed. And look, really excited to be here today. It feels sometimes quite weird to talk about yourself, actually, when you look back on history, right? Because at the time, I don't think any one of those jumps felt like a certainty. They all felt exciting, risky, and everything else in between. So perhaps if I start right at the beginning. So I actually, when I first joined Octopus, this would have been 2014. I joined in effectively in the sales team, and I'd come from a very different background, a background that was much more hardcore sales, actually. And Octopus was the first place where I really felt that the culture in the interview process was lived by the business as a whole. And it was really the first time that I joined a sales team where everyone was playing to win together. They were playing to make sure that the customers got the right service and the right products. And in very much, to a large degree, it was the first time I really felt at home. And I actually spent the best part of 2 years in that team. I had an amazing time. And then, unfortunately, on a personal level, I lost my dad. And at the moment that happened, I spent a bit of time thinking to myself, where would I be if this happened to me? So let's say my dad wasn't 60. Let's say I fast forward 40 years from that point. And would I look back and be sad about the fact that I hadn't tried to see whether or not I could make a go of it and whether or not I could push myself? And so it was actually that led me to contact Simon Rogerson, the founder of the group, with an idea. And that idea then eventually, over a series of iterations, led to me and a couple of others being founding members of the Octopus Wealth business, alongside a number of people who are still running that business today. And it was one of those fantastic experiences where that felt like a crazy risk at the time. I was early 20s. If I'd stayed on the straight and narrow path, I could have probably ascended within the sales team. And so by taking the path a bit less traveled, I'd suddenly introduced a massive degree of risk. I didn't know if I was going to succeed. The people around me were fantastic. I was getting a chance to learn from some really inspirational people, as I say, many of whom are still running that business today. But it isn't certain. And that has probably been the feeling I've been chasing for my whole career. I started to really love the uncertainty, and I loved the fact that the path wasn't written for me, and I might be able to try and write my own and have an influence on it. And so I've actually worked in probably 6 or 7 businesses since then, but always following the same philosophy, which is trying to take the opportunity to try and do something you love rather than something that's safe right in front of you.
Sounds like good advice, and interesting how we both lost our fathers quite young, and that has then made us change the course we're on. Not necessarily dramatically, but just that appetite to live a bit more for today.
Totally, and I think my dad's 10-year anniversary was about 3 weeks ago, and I remember thinking, what would he say now if he could see me, and would he be proud? And actually, that desire, I think, to ultimately validate yourself for someone who cannot tell you that they're proud of you is unbelievably driving. It's the sort of thing that means that you genuinely do keep pushing yourself. But it's made me much happier, and I now have a son myself, and I hope that some of the lessons I've learned in my life I can pass on to him, like my dad did to me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he'd be proud. So moving on to your investing, how do you approach your day-to-day investing, especially, I guess, with a son to look after?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think this has changed as well. So when I was, I'm going to tell you some of my failures as well, because I think that's always quite funny. But when I was about, I think now you'd call it YOLOing, but at the time that phrase hadn't been invented. But basically, I was at a pub when probably about 2012. And the guy next to me was banging on about a business, an oil business in northern Iraq that he said was only going to go one way. And with a sum total of reading a single article about it, I believed him. And it just went completely into the opportunity. Obviously, I don't know if you'll track the part of the world, but probably a couple of years later, or maybe even a year later, ISIS took over that area. And that business went fully to zero.
What were the returns he promised you?
Do you know what? He didn't promise specific numbers. He just said you can't lose. And it turns out you could. And so that was a bit of a reset for me as well, because I'd sort of sat in this position of going, God, I've really got to take lots of risk all the time in every place, because that's how I'm gonna get there. But what it actually taught me was that the key part is to take real risk and to take it sensibly. You need to make sure you've got your foundations in place. So since then, I've actually erred towards trying to take a balance. So in a lot of my things like my pension and my ISA, I'll actually pick some fairly vanilla investments. I'm not picking anything super crazy. And the reason is because actually in my personal life, when I do find someone who's setting up a business, I've been really lucky to meet a whole range of really interesting founders over the last sort of 10 years or so. And quite often you want to support them. You want to help them on their journey, partly to help them grow the business, but also partly because you believe in the problem they're trying to solve. And so I try to barbell it actually with a little bit of, perhaps a bit more vanilla on the kind of listed side, and then actually barbelling the other side with a few bets. I mean, some of them have worked out okay, some I hope will, and some are not long for this world or have left this world. But ultimately, I think it's that approach that's allowed me to step away from that feeling of being out of control, even if actually, if you looked at it, some of the individual things are relatively risky.
So what's the rough split then? How much is in safe stuff, as we call it, and then how much is in the more interesting private companies?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it comes back to the balance that you have in your life, right? So for me, of my personal investments outside of the business that you used to work for and I work for, probably about 30% is in what I would deem as EIS or VCT. So those are very, very early stage businesses in the UK that are trading in such a way that they're considered high growth. And for a number of other factors, when you invest in them, you can actually get a little bit of tax relief back from the government. And so I tend to spread across those. My strategy is broadly to pick and invest relatively small check sizes across a basket. And then when follow-on rounds come on, try and back the winners. And so the way I try and think about that is if every portfolio, if you think of it building a specific portfolio, maybe if you can pick 2 winners out of 10, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. And have you had any exits yet, or is that all still
no exits? I'm fully on the hype wagon for all of them though.
Brilliant. So moving on to when you're selecting those private investments, what is it that you're looking for and how do you find them as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think maybe if I tackle the second one first. So finding your first couple is really, really hard because you don't have a network. And unless you actually come from a background of people who founded businesses, there's not really any reason why you would. But what I found is that if you go, and it's going to sound really like I'm teaching people to suck eggs, but if you get yourself out to events which are accelerators, so on, and presentations where startups are pitching, I found that really helpful. There's lots of networking opportunities for startups. And actually, once you've got a couple, you'll tend to often meet other investors. And other investors, for me, have been a really strong source of deal flow. You know, people who'll know the sort of things you're interested in, the sort of sectors that you're not interested in. So, there's some pretty obvious exclusions for me that just don't sit well with my view on the world. So I try and stay away from gambling and stuff like that. And there are other sectors that I knowingly know nothing about, and so stay away from those too. Although I didn't approach that early on, and that was also the cause of some sad times. But so yeah, I found that as I've done more of it, actually, it's the investing community around those businesses that tends to create the most deal flow. So the first couple are definitely the hardest. And whether you invest them or not, it doesn't really matter. It's if you can get into that community, that's where your opportunities will come. And And yeah, I mean, there's an element here where, you know, you have to approach it eyes wide open. You know, as I talked about earlier on that risk balancing perspective, the way I tend to try and think about it is make sure that you've got a cash reserve in place for all the needs that you might have in the short term. And you can decide whether that's, you know, X months or X years. You pick the number, build up enough reserve to be safe, because actually the biggest risk that you're taking is if you have no safety net, then you can do all the investments you like in the world. But until there's liquidity, you're pretty screwed.
Yep. That's why I always keep some liquid, and effectively everything else you don't really have for 10, 15 years. So you managed to find some opportunities. You were saying some you might just invest just to get into the community. But when you can start to be picky, what is it about a company that makes you think, yes, that's the one I want to put money into?
Yeah. So I think there's probably two layers. The first is a kind of hygiene layer. So typically, early stage businesses, in my mind, have got really three things they need to do really well. They need to have I think if you're going the VC world, I'm sure there's a much bigger list. But to me, what I'm looking for is, do I believe that the founders, and this is the most important by a country mile, are extremely passionate, not just about the problem they're trying to solve right now, but also about building something valuable. And the reason I mention that, not just a problem right now, is that one of the businesses, in fact, actually a couple of them have undergone pivots. And the original pitch deck that you saw actually doesn't bear that much resemblance to the product that's really going in the market. It's the founders, it's their behaviors, it's the way they think. And so being able to really try and test whether or not someone has that founder DNA, that real drive to build something valuable, that's normally the main driver. I think the second bit that always comes in for me is how much of someone's focus is being put into a business. So I've tended to avoid businesses where, I've never invested in a business where the founders are still working their normal jobs. I don't think that's a good sign at all. Equally, a business where they have hundreds of advisors but no permanent focused staff is generally not something I'm that keen on, because I think you want people for whom losing is the same on a personal basis as a corporate basis, and that's where I think you get that buy-in to succeed. And then the third bit is anything that's around proven distribution, I think is really interesting. So, you know, broadly, I've invested in businesses that are not creating the world's best product for that particular market, or certainly not a product that couldn't be replicated. But what they are trying to do is create a distribution edge that is quite hard to replicate or drive, at least. And so businesses that have early customer traction with recurring contracts will always rate really, really highly. Some of the things in reverse I've actually weighted less important over time. It's going to sound really bizarre, but pitch decks and financial models have become, again, they're sort of a hygiene factor. They got to kind of make sense. But when I first started, I put a lot of stock into how good the pitch deck was, and did the story make sense, and was the market massive, and were they trying to capture a tiny part of it? And the reality is that, you know, it doesn't really bear any reality to the business after 3 months or something like that. And the same with financial modeling, right? The spreadsheet is wrong the moment you save it. So, you know, making sure there's no insane assumptions is not a terrible idea. But ultimately, if those first three buckets for me are not covered, it's basically a no.
Yeah. Seems like we're slightly different on the financial model there. But I know it's all not true, but the fact that they can do it, and then, yeah, you can play about with assumptions and check that they've not done anything crazy, has probably saved me from some bad investments.
Might have saved me, to be honest.
So that's when you're investing on a personal level, but you also invest for Octopus Group, effectively. You're buying companies for them. What is it you're looking at there? Is it the same things, or is it much more about strategic?
A lot of the stuff's the same, actually. So the Octopus Group is really lucky to have Simon as the founder and Chris as well, both amazing entrepreneurs, and they have this kind of sixth sense for when a founder in front of them has exactly what it takes. And I've learned so much just by being able to observe how they think about it. But in many ways, it's very much the same. There is probably an extra element of strategic fit. Certainly the financial modeling is much more important, because the businesses that you will look to acquire when you're a company will tend to be a lot more advanced in the stage at which I personally invest. So I'm typically investing in a seed round, or perhaps a friends and family round, or at most the first round they raise from externals. But corporately, you tend to invest a little bit later on once you've seen a few of those proof points. So it means that the bets tend to be surer, because they tend to have a lot of the pieces in play. And actually, some of the entrepreneurs we brought into the group are unbelievable. And being able to spend a bit of time with them, so the founders of Amicable and Legacy would be a really good example. A bit of time with those guys, and you come out with like a new perspective on life and a real hunger. And it's a real pleasure to be able to work with them. And then being able to take that back into your personal life has just helped me a couple of times, I think. It's not foolproof, actually. I'll talk about a couple that haven't worked out, but in my personal life, it's helped me find a few founders that I think really have got the mettle.
Yeah. And so you said you talk about a couple that didn't work out. Go on then.
Yeah. So one theme, I talked about the pub story earlier. Another good theme is there was a private company I invested in probably about 2 years ago that was in the education space. And the market opportunity for this was basically to provide a methodology for screening large numbers of CVs and trying to remove bias from the CVs. So it's all about removing the potential and perceived inequalities within a hiring process based on people's backgrounds, orientation, all that sort of stuff. So the product, nuts cool, really, really cool. The challenge a little bit, I think, was I went into that convinced so heavily that the product was needed by the market that actually I took my foot off the gas a little bit on some of the DD, particularly around the distribution partners. And the business actually had a couple of really key contracts, but those contracts, if they didn't get renewed, was going to be a tough time for the business, and that's actually what happened.
Yeah.
And so that was my fastest loss.
How quick?
Probably less than 6 months and over 95% or something of that order. So that was.
And was that EIS? Were you able to claw some of it?
It was EIS qualifying, but it helps make the punch a little bit less solid, but it's still a pretty heavy blow, especially because I'd done a few successful investments prior to that, or currently successful anyway, and started to let myself think I might have a good chance of picking them. So there is another component here, which is try and keep yourself in check as much as anything, and that was really, really helpful. Yeah,
and how much is track record a factor? Do you only invest when someone's already launched a successful business, and this is like their second or third? As Octopus, I'd say, because clearly you're in the very early stage. But
yeah.
When it's Octopus, because I feel like there's some founders out there who it would almost be impossible to get in on their fundraisers because it would be so kind of popular because they've already proved themselves.
Yeah, so I think repeat founders, certainly I'm not super close to it, but within our ventures business, I would think repeat founders are really attractive investment opportunities because they have exactly what you're talking about there. They've got a proven track record. They've got the ability to clearly build a distribution business and build a company that has a singular mission, and then most importantly, raise capital proportionally and then exit the business at scale. So, I think to the extent you get an opportunity to back a founder who is a repeat founder, I think that's really, really interesting. So I definitely place some weight on that. Actually, what we've tended to invest in at a group level, though, is much more what I would describe as life event businesses. So these are founders who have been impacted by a really specific and very highly emotional moment, so death or divorce. And there will be others, no doubt, in time. But by that very nature, I think actually in both cases, we have repeat founders, but actually the thing that really stood out to us was the passion behind which they're taking to solve that problem. And I think you can tell, particularly in highly emotional moments, and particularly if you've experienced one, that death, not divorce for me, you start to really connect with the founder about their passion with that problem. And I think it helps you work out quite quickly whether in the nicest way possible they want to build a business and this happens to be the sector, or whether they want to change this sector. And that split is really, really powerful.
Is there a risk there that the emotions actually cloud their judgment of how much the market needs the product?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, right? So I think, obviously you want in this case, super smart founders, unbelievable hard workers, massively mission driven. I think one of the things that you can really try and test over time is tenacity. And I think when someone's emotionally connected to a problem, the tenacity is just off the scale. I probably see, 25 businesses a year, 30 businesses a year, personally and professionally. And 100% of those founders can tell you why they're passionate about that problem. You don't believe 100%. And being able to get, even if I could get slightly better every year at judging that, I think that would be the biggest compounding impact to success.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's all about people in the end, rather than almost like a detective's ability to tell when someone's
Yeah. I would be interested. detectives probably would be pretty good at it.
Get them to join.
It's a real
you on
crossover
meetings.
Venn diagram, that.
So let's talk a little bit then about Amicable and Legacy. So there are two businesses that you've led on the deal for Octopus, coming in and buying those businesses or investing. I'll let you explain. But let's start with Amicable. What is the business model there?
So it's a fantastic business. So the two founders, Kate had come from a previous bit. Kate had just come out of a number of divorces and been through the divorce process in the UK, and Pip had built a previous business at a real scale that she'd exited. Together, they'd basically looked at the divorce market in the UK and realised that it's by its very nature adversarial, because you both pick your own solicitor, and sometimes that is not a terrible thing, but quite often interests aren't aligned. And actually, if your interest is how do we have a relationship, particularly if there are children involved, where you still have both parents, your parents are not necessarily saying the world's greatest friends, but they are working together to co-parent you. And that model, they believed, was structurally hard to achieve because of the fact you had to get different legal representation. So they went to an enormous effort right to the top court in the land and won, to be able to prove that actually the best way to do it was to bring families together around this moment and to amicably separate. And in doing that, then give the family the best chance of helping the children and helping each other move on as well. And again, when we met the team, you're just blown away by, it's not a space I'd ever encountered before. I'd never really thought about it. I've got friends who got divorced and their parents as well. And it was always horrible. But until someone says to you, well, shouldn't there be a better way? You don't think about it. And then when someone does say to you, well, shouldn't there be a better way? You're like, hang on a second. That's crazy. And so I remember walking out of that room going, wow, these guys are top tier. And not only that, they are driving an industry forwards that has not been innovated in. And it's not been innovated in. Particularly, I think it's also worth stating that industries that are regulated in any way, whether that's in the legal services space, the financial space, or any other, tend to have a bit of a natural defense against innovation, because it's harder for really new ways of thinking to penetrate the market, because you're always going to have it's regulated space.
So just quickly, what is the actual business?
The business is effectively, so if you're going through a divorce, you would work with a coach, Amicable. The coach would work with both sides, and over a period of a couple of weeks to a couple of months, depending on your time frame, help you create a divorce plan between the two of you, and then they'll take care of all the legal work in the background, such as that might exist. So it is a one-stop shop. The success rate is nuts off the chart. And
when you say that, what does success?
Success is a separation that occurs without having to go through the adversarial legal process. And that's in the high 90s. Customer satisfaction is super high as well. And the other component is because they're able to work across both elements, we believe, and customer feedback will tell us, that those families continue to operate more efficiently afterwards, whether that's with new partners or not. Ultimately, there is still that glue around your child and the ability to work. I mean, they're bringing out new products all the time to help support that journey, year after year and beyond.
That was about to be my question, is that aftercare? So,
yeah.
Okay, that sounds amazing.
It's super cool. And if you're in London and you get the tube ever, or perhaps you see the adverts, yeah. And again, the team there have created a really compelling. It's very hard, I think, to stand out on the tube. Most people are trying to look at their phone, and I know I'm biased, right? Of course I am, but I always stop to look at the advert, and I go, oh wow, I didn't realise that. So there's one I saw yesterday. There's something like 89% of children whose parents are thinking about getting divorced don't want them to stay together for the kids. And you're like, that is nuts. Really, I didn't realise that. Yeah. And so to the extent you're in London, have a look. If not, I think they'll probably, no doubt, go national at some point. But the philosophy is very much human-centric. It's relationship-focused. And I think it's what, over the next 5 or 10 years, divorce will look like in the UK.
Amazing. And then, so moving on to Octopus Legacy, what is the business model, and what were the founders like?
Sam, who founded Octopus Legacy, he actually went through a loss similar to us, but actually a bit more traumatic, actually. And that led him to realising that when you lose a loved one, I don't know if it's the same realisation for you, but you go through this up to the moment of loss. The world's set up in an okay way, which is that people gather around you, they call you for the first couple of weeks after, they bring you food, all those sort of components. The part of the world that's not set up well is all your financial and legal life afterwards. So lots of people don't have a will. That is really tough on the ones that you leave behind.
Just what does that mean, actually? Because that came up the other day, people chatting, being like, if you don't have a will, does your money still go to your family? What happens?
Yeah, so this is a great question, actually. And Sam, I'm going to steal one of Sam's lines here, which is basically, if you don't have a will, then the government's written your will. Because there's actually a process called the laws of intestacy, which dictates how your assets are split. Now, in most cases, they may not be that different to how you might want it, but there are some edge cases where those assets are split in a way that you would not like. Certainly, if you have a family dynamic that means you want to give more to one of your children or one relative over another, that is not going to happen under the laws of intestacy. And when you're dealing with blended families, perhaps remarriages and so on, that is not going to work either. So I would strongly encourage, whether it's your Octopus Legacy or literally just going down to WH Smith and picking up their will guide, get yourself a will if you haven't got one. Make sure it's updated. Sam has this great line of treating it like a living document. So I've got a will through them. And when Connor, my son, was born, I updated it. And I'll update it at the next life moment and the moment after that, because ultimately for me, it gives me it used to be something that just sat in the back of my head that I hadn't done and I knew I should do. And then actually having it finished has allowed me to start feeling like I've put my wife and son in a better position if things go wrong. So that's where Octopus Legacy started, will writing. They actually have, probably the title's given it away, moved into looking at how do you change the whole way that death happens in the UK and how do you leave a legacy behind that you can be proud of. And I talked a little bit about some of the pain and the admin behind the scenes. So if I just talk about my own situation, when my dad died, we had to get something like 10 death certificates. For each one of those, you have to go to a registrar and you have to pay them. I think it's 25 quid or something like that. So it's actually not inexpensive. And you send them to banks and you say, please, can you transfer this account to the estate of, rather than to my dad in that case. And some of them send them back and some of them don't. And then you realise you don't need 10, you need 15. And you have to go back. And then they email you a pack and the pack's not really right and it's not the quite right numbers. And then you have to call them up and they all tell you that they're terribly sorry. And it's not their fault, right? It's just how the system's set up. But what you really want is someone to say, don't worry, I'm going to sort it all out for you. There's a couple of decisions you have to make. And once you've made those, we're going to take care of everything else. And that is basically the problem Legacy is solving. So for what Amicable is doing around separating and relationships ending, Legacy is doing for death.
And how complex? Are they serving a mass market for people who want a basic, simple will? Or do they go into the realms of, I want a trust and I want
do everything.
They do everything.
Do everything. I would say most people in the UK, I mean, obviously make your own choice, but for most people in the UK would have thought a will and a power of attorney is the kind of foundation that you want. But obviously there are some people whose situation is a bit more complicated. And in that case, you can work with one of their solicitors. So most of the process is online, but if you do want something a bit more bespoke, there's a team there that can support you.
And seeing it as a business, how does the business model work? Are they charging for the will? Are they charging something in the event of the death? How does it?
Yeah, so they provide two levels of service. Really, they provide wills and lasting powers of attorney. Those are what customers would buy through the website, and then there's also a probate service at the end, because that's one of the things that can be quite painful. So often, I mean, in my case, we actually, myself, my brother, and my mum decided to administer my dad's estate, which is known as the kind of executor role, partly because it wasn't that complicated, and partly because my brother and I were interested. I didn't know how much work it was going to be up front. I thought it was going to be, I'm making it up at 10 hours, and it was 100 hours. And it's not 100 hours in one go. So it's not even like you can take 2 weeks off work. It's 45 minutes every 3 days for 6 months or something. I mean, those numbers won't work, but yeah. But it's the continuous nature of it as well that I found really draining. So I think probably if I had my time again, I would consider using a professional executor. Now, a lot of people will use their local solicitor. That's totally fine. And I think it's just about retaining the fact that you have that choice, and you can either choose to do it yourself, or you can choose to appoint a professional, and that could be a solicitor or Octopus Legacy or something like that.
And so the money bit, are they cheaper than a standard solicitor, or is they same price, but they've just made a simpler process?
So, good question. I would have thought that both Legacy and Amicable are more competitive price-wise than their competitors, but I think I don't think it's really a price play. Actually, I think it's a service play.
Yeah. Well, AI will come in, I'm sure, clear a lot of those jobs off the table. So, if you had one investment tip right now, if you suddenly had 10k come in, where would you be putting that?
Can I split it?
Yeah.
I can split it.
Yeah.
Okay, so probably what I would do is I would probably take half of it, and over the next 5 opportunities that came my way, put $1,000 in each. And then I would keep the rest dry for probably 12 months or so, because at the end of the 12-month period, you'll be able to get a much clearer view of which one of those businesses is going to be going somewhere. And then the moment that you know, I would double down on your winner. So probably over the space of 12 to 18 months from now, you'd have 4 companies you put 1,000 in and 1 company that you put 6 in.
Interesting. And there's murmurs, etc., that we've got a recession coming. Do you think that's true? And if so, are you preparing for it in any way?
Yeah, amazing question. I mean, I think the answer to the second one is probably not well enough, because I think that there's a lot of rumours around. I mean, you look at global politics, that's probably not helping. And I think, budget uncertainty in this country is certainly keeping people a bit jumpy as well. But over the next couple of weeks, I think we'll know the answer to one of those questions. But in terms of, do I think there's a recession coming? I don't know, if I'm honest. I mean, almost any point in a cycle, you can look at it both ways. But what I would say is that if you have your baseline covered, your cash reserve covered, that would be the thing I'd think about. If you're nervous about the way the world's going or the market dynamics, just make sure you've got that covered. Because if you've got that covered, the purpose of it is to be able to help you weather a storm. So let's say your dishwasher breaks or something like that. Having the money aside to be able to replace that is your kind of ultimate defense against volatility. And then it's up to you to decide how big a bucket you want that to be. And what I'm talking about there, to be really, really clear, is cash. So some of you may have seen that from the 1st of December, the FSCS rate on cash is going to go up. It's going to go up from 85 to 120. That's obviously a lot of cash that you can have full coverage on. So what I would say is for your cash reserve, I tend to think of it in 2 areas. I think of it as sort of money I want to be able to access pretty much straight away. And then for the money that you need a little bit less quickly, you may choose to try and find a slightly better rate from a bank, both of which I think are pretty good ways of giving yourself some protection from market cycles and dynamics.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Some really interesting ideas there, and also great to learn about amicable and legacy. That's kind of the health check that some of us need to actually go in and sort some of those things out in our lives. Luckily, I can finally say, instead of the book is coming, the book is out. It has been for a year, but I haven't been doing the podcast for a year. Please do go and buy a copy, and then we will be back soon with another guest. Thank you.
Thanks, Fed.